welcome to the Bernice Vanek Show.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me here. And I just wanted to do more for animals and take care of them. And so I didn't realize what I was doing to animals every day by eating them.
Yeah.
And I was shocked. And I just decided there and then, that's it, no more. Not supporting this industry. And then I realized that it's all the same industry, really.
Yes.
And the dairy industry is horrendous. I actually found out only afterwards how horrendous. I mean, that's how much they keep it from you and nobody ever knows about.
Yeah, there is a very, very dark side to the meat and dairy industry, which we're going to tap into a little bit later, that the public really are not aware of. I mean, supermarkets and stuff, they paint all these beautiful pictures of, like, you know, the animal, happy cows and free range and grass and special deboned leg of lamb, especially cut up for you.
Dairy farms at glass walls would all be vegan, not vegetarian. But yeah, I guess I'm an activist every day. I tell people I'm a 24-hour activist. Wake up in the middle of the night thinking about activism. Yeah, it never stops.
Vegan activism with our guest Sven Fautley, who is a representative of the South African Vegan Society.
So tell us about what actually happens behind the scenes on factory farms.
Well, yeah, factory farms are there for a reason, and the reason is there's a huge demand for animal products, and it's just through business efficiency that creates these factory farms. In America, they call them CAFOs.
I have heard of that.
And these factory farming units are basically just packing as many animals as possible into a small space to make it more efficient and more profitable. And as we know, the animals don't have any rights because they're considered production units.
We're not allowed to know what goes on inside slaughterhouses. They don't allow TV crew in there, they don't allow people to come in there and see because of what really happens behind the scenes and how horrific. It's murder. It's murder and torture that these animals go through for us to have a few mouthfuls of meat or chicken.
There are things called gestation crates that they put the mothers in, and they tie them down so they can't move, and also helps, you know, for the workers to be able to manipulate the crates and pick them up and whatever. And they're completely confined in this, they can't move at all. And the piglets just suckle on the mother and she can't get to them or nurture them.
Most of them die, and those that do survive, as I said, go through this process of being fattening up for our plates. And then the cows, let's talk about the dairy farming. That is another horrific thing when people think I'm not going to eat meat but I'll eat dairy. Let's talk about how the cows are actually impregnated and what happens to their young.
Yeah, with cows, they put the cow into what the industry calls a rape rack to confine the cow so it can't move and bolt or whatever. And basically a vet will lube his arm up and put a glove on that comes basically to his shoulder and stick his whole arm, his fist, down the cow's anus, and to be able to reach into the cow to be able to feel what's going on. And then he inserts a steel probe, cold steel probe, into a vagina and squirts in the semen, which is taken from a bull via anal electrocution. And that's how the cows are impregnated. So that's really horrendous, and that they do this constantly. The cows are basically, for I think they live about 4 or 5 years.
Correct.
And they're constantly impregnated because what people don't understand is that cows don't give milk. We actually steal their milk.
Correct.
And we steal it from the mouths of their babies. But because the babies will drink the milk, obviously, because that's how nature intended it, the babies are taken away within 2 or 3 days. They are forcibly taken away from the mother so that we can basically drink their milk. That's the reality of the dairy industry.
They have also, I have seen where they've actually, they put special devices on the baby cows with spikes on it, so that they cannot go and take their mother's milk. And they actually, some of them, they give them artificial milk to drink, and they put in these tiny little pens, these baby cows, and all the male cows, all the little male baby cows are killed for our veal. So veal is a baby cow, which is literally months, like 3 months old. That is veal, guys.
I've actually seen those devices on their noses. It's got like spikes, so that if they come near the mother and they want to drink, they'll poke the mother and she'll move away, and then the baby won't be able to drink. And the baby cows you're talking about in the veal crates, they call them, they're little fiberglass kennels, basically surrounded by a bit of wire, so that the calf can't move very far. It can go into the kennel and come out and eat, and that's about it. But they don't want the calf to exercise, because then the meat gets too tough. So veal is a very soft white meat, and it's sort of very anemic. But it comes from these baby calves that are killed at like 3 or 4 months old. And I've seen them actually at dairy farms. I've gone up to them, and there's just rows and rows of these little calves confined there, and scared and crying out for their mothers, and just basically on death
I
row.
think there's borders on animal abuse.
Of course it is, but because it's in the name of food and food security and all that kind of thing, it's overlooked. The rules are that it's food and we have to do it, and people have this underlying belief that we need to do these things. So even with gestation crates and these devices that the industry uses, even if they stop using that, the underlying fact of it is that we're going to kill those animals. So it doesn't matter how poetry read and grass-fed the animals are, and humanely treated they might be. You might know a farmer, and the farmer treats his animals well and all that, and then one day he sells it off to some other guy who goes and takes it and mistreats it completely, and they all end up in the same slaughterhouse. So it doesn't matter what kind of life they've had.
And sometimes they don't die immediately. Sometimes they still are alive when they get cut up. And they are, these cows that are hooked up for dairy, they're hooked up to machines twice a day. And it's like literally thousands and thousands of liters of milk that come out. And some are also injected with bovine growth hormone to boost the milk production. So they're given hormones and confined into small spaces just to produce us milk. And there's obviously infection that goes into their teats, when the machines go. So all that's like, it's pus and blood and everything goes into the milk, and there is obviously a purification system that goes through for us before we drink it, but it's still there. Those cows are suffering for us, and they do feel pain, they do feel emotion. I was witness to how I became vegan as I witnessed a pig falling off the back of a bakkie here in the West Coast Road. This big sow pig came running to my car. She was huge, and they were laughing, and it took 4 people to try and pick her up. And she came to my car, and she was crying and screaming, and I was like, let me help this pig, somebody help me. And they said, no, it's been sold to a slaughterhouse. And that's how I became vegan. And for me it was an awakening. I thought, this poor animal, whoever was going to eat this animal was going to partake in its suffering and trauma it just experienced. So for me, being in this, doing spiritual work and personal coach for 15 years, this for me was like it blew my compassion level right open. My heart just flew open. I thought, it was absolutely devastating. And veganism is not a diet. Veganism is a way of life. It's being compassionate towards every single living sentient being on the planet, so that we don't partake. Because every time we buy that piece of meat or we buy that dairy, we are paying for that animal to suffer. And that's energetically a huge karmic backlash in our lives, let alone bad for our health. Meat and dairy is not good for our health.
Do you think there's enough awareness out there?
No. I think people are culturalized into eating meat, so it's not their fault. They're basically brainwashed by society.
Yes.
And into these kind of traditions that we just keep perpetuating to the next generation.
That whole, once you become aware and awakened, when you become vegan, that whole becomes darker and darker, and there's so much evil and so much underlying stuff that you start seeing and you becoming aware of. Even chickens are kept in there'll be 10 chickens in a tiny little cage that are stuffed together, and they turn the lights off to keep them in the dark so they can reproduce more eggs for us to eat. And most of them die, and then they take the male baby chicks as they're born, and they are suffocated and crushed alive. So they just keep the females
It's
for
legal
eggs.
in this country. I looked it up, and it's legal to either macerate them with spinning blades. You've seen that footage.
Yes, I have. Yes.
You can macerate them, and this is within 24 hours of their birth. You can suffocate them or crush them or gas them.
While they're alive, guys.
All those methods are sanctioned by
Yes.
South African law. They use antibiotics extensively. In the United States, they say that most of the antibiotics sold in the United States, more than 50%, are sold to the animal industry.
Yeah.
So that's more than humans use,
Yes.
because they need to keep the infections at bay. And also all these antibiotics go through to us, and we actually eat that.
Correct.
So you can't cook that away, you can't get rid of that. So we actually ingest all those antibiotics.
That's why we get sick.
That's another thing I was going to ask is if when you're doing this conversion, meat eater to vegan, how does your body react? You're so used to eating meat and those things.
It was funny. I went vegan like within 5 minutes or whatever it was that I watched that video in 1998, and I was immediately, I had biltong in the fridge and I just refused. I didn't touch it. That was it.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel any difference when I went vegetarian. But when I went vegan in 2008, about 3 or 4 weeks later, I just felt very light and sort of free and floaty. And
exactly.
I didn't know what it was. I thought, oh, maybe it's all that animal, fat from the milk and stuff in my veins and clearing out to my body. And then only a few years ago, I realized what it actually was, and it's the lifting of subconscious guilt.
Yes.
Oh my
Because-
goodness, this sounds very
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah, because we don't realize, but we know in some way that we're doing something very, very wrong, and it's that sort of knowing that sits behind us and every day that kind of is a weight on us. So when that's lifted, you just feel completely free. It's like Charles Atlas.
Yeah. Before the break, we were talking about subconscious guilt, and that is that feeling of when you become a vegan, how you feel. And I couldn't get that into words. I always said it was an awakening process, like a veil that gets lifted off you when you become a vegan. And you literally don't look at animals and look at life the same way ever again. It's almost like a switch that gets switched on. And what Sven was talking about, that people have these strong beliefs, and it's been embedded and ingrained in us since we were children, from when we were young, and it's called cognitive dissonance. So sometimes when people hold a core belief that is very strong, when they are presented with evidence that works against that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted. It creates a feeling that is extremely uncomfortable called cognitive dissonance. And because it is so important to protect that core belief, they will rationalize, ignore, and even deny anything that doesn't fit into that core belief. That is the
Good
meaning of
grief.
cognitive dissonance. And I know when I say that I'm vegan to people, and they always try and argue with you, say, I'm never going to give up meat and this and that, the other.
Yeah.
That's that defense mechanism coming up, and as you said, Sven, the subconscious guilt that comes forward.
Sure.
And what gets put into the meat, and that meat is actually dead DNA. I mean, that's another thing we didn't even talk about or touch the surface of, that people are literally eating dead DNA.
Yeah, well, they say any coroner will tell you that putrefaction begins immediately upon death. So anybody who's eating meat must remember that meat is basically putrefying, rotting immediately from when it's killed.
And maggot stage, if I'm correct, I was doing some research, is 24 hours. So as you said, the putrefaction is immediately, that maggot stage is already starting. The maggots are already in meat after 24 hours, and they inject obviously chemicals to have a shelf life for us to be able to have the meat in our fridges and on the shelves for weeks. So we really just are eating dead corpses. So Sven, thank you so much for coming onto the Bernice Vanek show on 1FM today. It was so interesting and so amazing that you came in here today.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and for all the work that you're doing and going out there and helping save the animals and creating awareness. Awesome.
It's a pleasure. If people want to know more, they can go to vegansociety.org.za.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I want to leave you with a quote that I saw that was, because I'm all about integrity and living my truth as a coach and helping other people, and I believe that if I help myself, that and each of us change ourselves, we can change the world, and that's how we should be. And I want to leave you with this. Understand the nature of impurity. If your key is bent, the lock will not open.
Wow.
Rumi.